Fill her up.
You're listening to the Gas Digital Network.
Good afternoon, Michael Malice here. Let that be your welcome for the next hour. We have a couple. I'm here with Dave Smith, who's host of Part of the Problem, 1/3 Legionist Gangs, star of Libertas, and host of the upcoming Freedom Fest, which I will be there from July 13th through July 17th in lovely Las Vegas, Sin City. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. I wish that that guy who shot up Vegas had a more identifiable look, because then I would have worn that outfit on one of my presentations.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you just wish he had used that as his defense. You got what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So I don't know what to tell you.
I don't think they put him on trial.
Did he not make trial?
Yeah, they did not. I even made that joke once about like it's insane in America that like I forget what it was, like some black athlete was on trial, but no one ever arrested with this guy's from Vegas, and they're like, they killed him. Like, yeah, thank you very much. So a couple of things to talk about, and I will leave it to you, and maybe we'll leave one of them for the crossover episode. I did read Anatomy of the State over the weekend, but as we record, which is Monday afternoon, Reddit has banned a ton of subreddits, including the Donald, which I think is the biggest subreddit or close to the biggest, and some other on the guise of fighting hate. Twitch banned the president. It is quite a change since we were kids when corporations would take a firm political stance in such a partisan way, in my opinion. So which of those topics would you rather talk about? Anatomy of the State, or do you want to talk about current events first?
Let's go with the current events first.
Okay.
I know people are going to get angry at me. There are people out there who are like dying for you to read Anatomy of the State and hear your thoughts. And then I'm like, let's go with the subreddit.
I certainly am very opposed to causing the audience to get upset and to dangling things in front of them and never paying it off to the amusement of everyone. So, Carpe Diem, who makes memes for President Trump, was banned off of Twitter last week. They said it's from multiple copyright infringement violations. Twitch just banned the president, I just said, and there are a bunch of subreddits that have been pulled. Molyneux has been kicked off of YouTube. I think that's a bit of a separate issue because they've been going after people like him in the very loose sense for a long time. I don't regard him as a partisan Trump person particularly, and I think that's probably a separate impulse, although they in some ways lead to the same goal, in some ways they do not. What are your thoughts about the Reddit stuff and the Carpe Diem stuff in particular, although your thoughts on Molyneux is certainly welcome? Well,
I do think, I understand where you could separate it, and I don't think Molyneux is a partisan, but I do think that he was certainly, I mean, I don't know if officially supporting Trump, but he was certainly very kind to Donald Trump in 2016, and he has a huge audience. I mean, he's got close to 1 million YouTube subscribers, and so I do think that's primarily the reason why he gets caught in the crosshairs of all of this. I think this is profoundly troubling, and it's one of the issues that I think libertarians have the toughest time dealing with. I've been talking about this for a few years now, and it is really, libertarians kind of have this view that private companies have the right to do what private companies want to do. They have the right to discriminate.
Even you saying it, I know you're like quoting them and know where you're going. Just even you hearing you paraphrase their stupidity really triggers me.
Well, here's the thing. I know
it's just, oh my God. Yeah.
Well, this is what bothers me. And it's bothered me particularly through the COVID lockdowns and through the Black Lives Matter, Antifa protest riots and things like this, where so many libertarians just kind of cling to their dogma And, you know, it's useful to have a philosophy and to have beliefs, but you have to kind of adjust to facts on the ground and take in information and actually be thoughtful about it. If you just respond with a bumper sticker to everything that happens, you end up sounding stupid. I mean, it's like there's like ideology is not supposed to be a shackle. It's supposed to be a tool. So the idea that you're, you know, like if you don't even re-examine, you know, your beliefs and the situation. So look, when you have people getting booted off Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, particularly the thing with Alex Jones, where they clearly all conspired to do it in tandem.
Yes.
So you go, okay, so a libertarian would have said, now we might be anarchists or whatever, but a libertarian would have said, if somebody was out in the public square and they were saying something political that was unpopular and the government came and dragged them out of there, everyone would say, this is a violation of your First Amendment rights. This is a violation of freedom of speech. But if you're looking at things in 2020, this is the public square now. Now, it might not be public technically, but in effect, that Twitter, Reddit, this is where the president communicates. This is where people go to get news, information, where they communicate. And if they can just be removed from that and effectively silenced, that is something to think about. And it's not something to just answer with dogma. Now, I understand that maybe you don't want state intervention. I'm not even arguing for that, but it's certainly really troubling, the idea that these huge corporations who are oftentimes very in bed with the government can effectively shut people up and unperson them. I find it very creepy and dangerous.
There's a lot I agree with. There's some I disagree with. What I was going to say, which I'm sure you do agree with, which I thought you were going to paraphrase, is when you hear people say, well, they're a private company, they could do whatever they want. And whenever I hear someone say that, I immediately write that person off completely as having no mind. And that's a strong statement, and I can back it up, because if you go to a restaurant and they serve you cold food, to say, well, and you turn your dinner, you and I are having dinner, and you're like, the food's cold. And if you say, well, they're a private company, they can do what they want, that is of no value as a fact. It's a factual, pointless incoherence. It's internally coherent, but it's of no relevance. And people say this all the time as a mechanism of forestalling any criticism of behavior by private companies. And it's the corporate version of what Rothbard called, was it modal libertarians? He had this essay about how some people think libertarianism and freedom means you could go to your friend's house and like take a dump on the floor, and if they're complaining about it, then you're infringing on their freedom. And he's like, these people, like, you could tell that, you could feel his rage as he typed, like these people have no concept what liberty means. And you and I often talk about, and others, that Hoppe makes the point that it's not at all follows logic that in a ANCAP society, it would be more freedom in the sense that people could do whatever they want without consequence, and all sorts of behaviors would be allowed. That said, I also don't like the concept of public space. I don't think it's a coherent one, and I don't like using that term. My point, I agree with you, that's troubling. And that's why we're talking about it. This isn't one of those, this is fine, like let's just sit on our hands moments. The point, I think, and I've made this point many times before, is there doesn't need to be a one-size-fits-all social media Twitter site, one-size-fits-all video site. We have several networks. And the best example of this is dating. It used to be, what was the only one? OkCupid, or eHarmony. Now you have Christian Mingle, you have the gay ones, you have the black bondage ones, there's whatever you want. So the premise that it would be better, or it is necessary for everyone to be in one place, is not true. And I'm not saying that you think it's true. And in my view, this is a necessary step to having our cultures, that America has at least two of, self-segregate. There's no way, if we try to entirely work within their culture when they have the public schools and much of corporate America, we can't win. What we can do is take the talented, creative people, create viable alternatives, and I think that is the medium-term peaceable solution. Now, the argument comes, well, it's June. You're going to be creating alternatives before November? Yeah, that is a very big problem. That said, I think this is going to, I agree with that. That's why I'm saying I agree with you. It's troubling. This is going to light a fire under a lot of people's asses. And this is a huge market opportunity to be like, wait a minute. If the friggin' president is not safe on this platform, I do not feel safe on this platform either. If they're going to demonetize people to drop a hat, I left Facebook. I'm on Locals now, which is Ruben's thing, because I know no matter what I post on there, I, at the very least, am going to get a heads up phone call and a conversation with the guy who runs it. And I was kind of drafted to be there in the sense of like, we want you here. That is, I mean, if we are in a space, and by we, I just mean people who are not part of the blue pill community, are in a space where we're there as, they regard it as a favor, or like you're a pest that you're here, that is not a long-term effective strategy to work with.
Yeah, so I don't disagree with what you're saying, and I think it's quite possible that it would be preferable to have this kind of cultural segregation and have people kind of go their own ways. I mean, I'm all about, peaceful coexistence, but there also is like the reality of the situation where we are. And the libertarian answers on this there's a wide range of them. It goes from, like it's a private company, they can do whatever they want, to what you were saying. Some people, the more left libertarian types, will actually say, this is the market solving the problem of racism. We're kicking all of the racists out. This is wonderful. And some of them, more like me, will say, this is really bad and we should speak out against it. But I wonder, how far people are prepared to take this. I mean, obviously, the president of the United States, it's so absurd. The idea that the guy who controls the nuclear football can't, have access to one of these platforms is just, it's out of a cartoon. But there have been examples of banking institutions discriminating against people like this too. And I just wonder, like, even libertarians, how far are you willing to take this? I mean, if you have something like, okay, well, these banking institutions won't, give Alex Jones a credit card or something like that. Maybe you can put up with that for some Sandy Hook related reason or something like that. How about if they just said, this is their move for gun control? Okay, the state's not going to take away your guns, but none of the banks will work with you. You're essentially, you can't get a loan. Yeah, well, they've done it with manufacturers, but I'm saying, what if just people? What if they were just doing it with people?
Let me give you an example. I'll show you with this. I have, one of the things I spite funded is this pen holder right here. It's made of the fans paid for it. It's made of a fossilized walrus tusk. And the guy who...
You always have some new thing, and it's always right there by the computer.
Well, I don't have legs. So I'm just farting in this chair 25/8. And I do have some cool stuff in the mail, I'm not going to lie. And the guy makes gun... I don't even know the term. And all the people out there who are gun people are going to laugh at me. And you're right to laugh at me. It's the part of the gun that goes on the handle, that like the grip, I think it's called. And he makes custom grips for guns. Because he does that, so he's not selling guns. It's purely decorative. Because he does that, Visa and MasterCard won't work with him. Yep. So this isn't some weird hypothetical. This isn't some far-fetched thing. This is already the situation now. And what's I'm glad about is that I don't want people listening to this think that I am blasé, that I'm shrugging my shoulders and going to be like, oh, it's fine. It's all going to work out in the end. I'm not saying that. I'm saying this is where I'm looking to see solutions. I don't think Elaine Powell, Elaine Powell, the former head of Reddit, I don't regard her as some unstoppable foe. And to think that this is going to be unstoppable is to regard her as that. What I'm glad about is that there are a lot of people in the tech space who might be largely apolitical, who see these moves and realize, yeah, they're coming for the president today and he's an ass, but I am at the mercy of these people. I'm a creator, I'm making content, and I have to be looking over my shoulder at some schoolmarm this is not a tenable position for me and my product long-term. I need to create workarounds. What's his name? Kim.com is one of these people who's been creating workarounds. I don't think he's particularly a Trump person. I could be wrong from my understanding, but I do know he's like, all right, we need to create other options than to have, like, I think there's like 6 server companies on Earth, and 6 is not a big number. It's even less than the Senate or the Supreme Court. You convince those 6 and you're SOL. He's like, this is not tenable for us. So, and here's one example. Locals is Patreon. Was for years, not that many years. A lot of these things happen really quickly. Patreon was, you go to Patreon, people give you money as a creator, you give them exclusive stuff or not, and they support you. I had a good Patreon going. I had a lot of support. I'm very, very fortunate of this. I do not take it for granted. They started booting people all the time, and they would boot people with no warning or no notice. It's just like overnight. So now having locals, it's like that solved that problem, and it solved it permanently. So I think the premise, which I'm not saying you have, that Twitter has to be where presidential campaigns or free or speech goes to be discussed is not long-term accurate, but I am very concerned about what is going to be done in the short term. And one of the things that can be done is, I don't know how many of these, there's people like Ted Cruz who are not dumb. Like Ted Cruz, like people hate him. Like I think it was Lindsey Graham who laughed in his face. He goes, no, it's Trump. Trump during the campaign in 2015, 2016 said, you work in the Senate every day and not one senator has endorsed you because no one likes you. You're an asshole. And there's some truth to that, obviously. And a lot of those senators sure didn't want Trump, and they still would endorse Ted Cruz and a fairly strong chance to take him down. They're like, I'm not working with this a-hole, who realized, wait a minute, this isn't just about Trump. They'd be more than happy to do this with me. I'm a senator. I have power. I'm not just going to sit on my hands.
Yes, I think that's right. But I do, there's one thing that's interesting is that, so I know Mike Cernovich was furious at Trump for not standing up for the Trump supporters who have been kicked off of all of these platforms, and also for the Trump supporters who have been assaulted in the streets and stuff like that and targeted. And I got to say, for the life of me, I don't understand why Trump did not make this a bigger issue throughout his presidency. It's not only is it a winning issue, it's strategically smart. It's true. It's everything you'd want for a political, winner. And he has not made a big deal out of this. And in fact, I found it I found it outrageous when he had that tweet that was like marked by Twitter about potential election fraud coming up. And then he goes, oh, we're having a meeting to think about cracking down on these. It's like, oh, now that it's you're going to have a meeting and we're going to think about doing something. This has been happening to people all throughout the country for voicing support of you. I mean, why would you not want to support those people? And I think there are so many videos at this point of people wearing MAGA hats being assaulted in the street that you would think that even most normie Americans, while they may not support Donald Trump, would be like, yeah, that's not really what should be happening in America. People shouldn't be assaulted because they support the guy who is the president of the United States. I just thought this was a huge winning issue for him, and I was surprised that he hasn't played it. And I think, there's probably still enough time for him to play this issue going into the election, but I'm really shocked that he hasn't thus far.
Yeah, one rule I tend to have, which I know you would agree with, is that, and this is not accurate as phrased, but I like to I'll phrase it this way: every political rumor that you hear is true, right? But all the criticisms that people behind the scenes say about like Lindsey Graham or Obama or John McCain or Joe Biden, they're true. Right? For the most part. And I don't mean like Obama was born in Kenya or he's a Muslim, but like what these people are like behind closed doors, like that does promulgate through media and then to the mainstream to a large extent. One of the big knocks on Trump is that he's this big narcissist who only cares about himself and doesn't give a crap about anything else. And a lot of the people who are MAGA types are just like, oh, blah, blah, blah. He loves America. I got to tell you, there's more than a grain of truth to that phrasing of him from everything I've seen. Like he turns on people, and I agree with him as a counterpuncher. If someone comes out against you, you got to put them in their place. But it seems to me that it very much his perception of a person's intelligence, quality, and value is directly a function of whether that person likes or respects him. Now, there's some strategy behind that, but then at the same time, yeah, these people who are fans of yours, who may not be on your radar screen, they are taking the bullets, and you're sitting on your hands in many regards.
Yeah, and in many ways, that quality is what got him to where he is now, and he never would have gotten here without it. But it's also the thing that limits him from being a truly transformational figure. Because even things like, even goals that he may have that I don't necessarily share, like, him, like, I don't want to see DACA kids kicked out. I think there's like a very legitimate debate about immigration and restricting immigration. I don't think is the craziest thing, even from a libertarian perspective. But I'm not really big on kicking out people who have lived in America since they were 4 years old or something like that. Like, I just don't. But if he wants stuff like that, should say, I don't know, support Jeff Sessions. But he won't, because Jeff Sessions, recused himself, and he's pissed off about that. And he said some nasty things about Trump. So he won't support that guy because he didn't, just praise Donald Trump. So even for his own agenda, if somebody, like, he won't support somebody who would support his agenda if they've been critical of him or not done things the way he wanted them to do. So it is a limiting factor, even though it's the thing that propelled him. His narcissism does limit him. I just keep thinking, it was actually something Mensis Molbug said. I think it was either on your stream or with Thaddeus. But he said at one point that the Trump moment was almost like this revolution before people were ready for a revolution. So they just didn't really know what to do with the revolution. They didn't, it does kind of remind me, I was saying this on my one of my streams the other day, but like the thing in Chaz, or Chop, or whatever that thing's called, it's almost like they're playing pretend revolution. Like, you don't really know what you're doing. You're just kind of like, I don't know, this will kind of be fun, but you don't really have a plan. And if you want a successful revolution, you better actually have a plan to move forward with this. But that's what I'm just seeing more and more out of Trump, is that it's kind of like there really was nothing more than meets the eye to the whole Trump moment. It's fun. He shits on the press all day long. He's a counterpuncher. And after that, the next level is just wind. Just that's it. That's all that's there.
Yeah, it's but here's what else is funny. I think a lot of people, I'm seeing this on Twitter, I think the lockdown has messed up a lot of people's heads. And they are now of the belief, and this is gleefully being beaten into them regularly by the cathedral, that Trump can't get reelected. And it's amazing because, first of all, I wasn't that long ago that Bernie was unstoppable for the nomination. He was ahead in every single poll except Minnesota for Super Tuesday, and he lost every single one of those states. Maybe there was one exception, I don't remember. To look at Joe Biden as unstoppable, to me, is really out there. I think Trump is in a lot better position now than he was in June of 2016, to put it mildly. And to look at, again, that Biden is someone who can't be beaten is really, really odd. Now, you can say, I don't think Trump is in a strong position for re-election. I can't see people re-electing him. But this was like what happened in, for example, in 1964, when Barry Goldwater was running for the Republican nomination. There had not been a conservative candidate for the Republican Party since, arguably, even if you want to give it to Hoover, let's say, which I don't agree with, but let's pretend Hoover, 32. So that's 32 years. Everyone else had been like a moderates or lefties. And the Republican Party was freaking out correctly, it ended up because he had the biggest landslide ever. But they're like, well, no one's going to vote for this guy, but you can't stop someone with no one. So they were throwing people at him, but the people they were throwing at him, including Mitt Romney's dad, George Romney, were terrible.
Rockefeller, I think, right?
And Rockefeller was the big one, the governor of New York. And when Goldwater took California, that was the nail in the coffin for Nelson. It was just, they were like, how is this really happening? So, and the other point is, and this is going to trigger a lot of people, and I'm not saying it because it will trigger them. I am saying this because I believe it, but it's also fun when it triggers people. So it's the perfect storm. Joe Biden has done a really good job, better than Trump in some ways, of taking on the radical left. Like Joe Biden is there because the Democratic Party wanted to stop Bernie. He is the one who stopped Bernie far better than Trump did, number one. During the campaign, there were all these activists who got in his face, and Biden literally turned his back on them. One guy said, open borders, open borders. Biden says, vote for Trump, and literally turned his back on the guy. Now, the other argument, the counter to that is, well, it doesn't matter because Biden's going to be such a weak figurehead that the crazies are going to be running the White House. The crazies are running the White House now.
Yes.
And it's not really that different from, let's suppose, a Reagan White House.
Well, one of the things that people fall into, and this is on all sides of the political spectrum, is they have their group and they cast everyone else as the other.
Yeah.
So this is what you'll see, like it's the Sean Hannity who's like the far left Nancy Pelosi, you know, like as if Nancy Pelosi really represents the far left of this country. They hate Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi's Adolf Hitler to those people, but that's their mind. So when they go, oh, if Joe Biden gets in there, the crazies will be running it. And they're thinking like Black Lives Matter and Antifa people will be running it. No, the crazies who will be running it is more like, you know, closer to John Bolton than it is to some Antifa kid. And that's my concern. You're talking about like the corporatist warhawks. They're the ones who are going to have control of it, not like your left-wing maniac friend or something like that. But what you were saying about...
Can I say one more thing? If you guys want to trigger, hold that thought because this is one sentence. If you want to trigger Trump supporters online, just tell them Joe Biden has a bigger track record of taking on the Black community than Trump does.
Well, it's absolutely true.
It's absolutely true.
There's no question about that. Yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff. We're living in a weird political age, and that's why anyone, whether you're a Trump supporter or a Biden supporter, to be like certain that your guy's getting in right now is, I think, insane.
What we are certain of is Joe Jorgensen is going to make the debates.
Obviously, Joe Jorgensen make the debates and lead the revolution for this country. But, you know, it's like, it reminds people oftentimes look to precedent and to the past, and that can, in a time of stability, I think that can make sense. But we are not in a time of stability right now. So I remember in like 2006, 2007, there would be people, only a few, but a few really good people like Peter Schiff, who were predicting a housing crash. And other people would look at this and they'd go, you know, housing's never gone down. And this was technically true. Housing had never had a major dip in American history. But if you looked at a chart of housing, it was like stayed pretty much steady, and then skyrocketed up. So to sit up here at the top and go, well, it's never gone down. It's like, yeah, it's also never done this before. So that, you know, like to just judge this by like, oh, well, this is what happened in the past, even though you were giving good examples of things that have happened in the past, like, you know, in Goldwater was 68. 64. I'm sorry. That's right. 64. That was Kennedy get elected in 60. This was Lyndon Johnson, who he lost. Right. So, okay. We don't live in a traditional political space right now. This is a very time of unrest, and it's not just Trump just being elected, but what just happened with Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. These things can change very, very quickly. And the truth is, right now, Trump or Biden, it's almost impossible to make predictions on that, because it is there are so many X factors right now of what could happen. So I don't think either side should be comfortable.
What I'm really excited about, and what Twitter, something really clicked for me over the weekend, and I'm glad to tell you and the audience this as well. I'm working on my next book, and while working on it, sometimes it's very hard to conceptualize what you want to put in there, what that you don't. Like what, you know, I am someone who, when I'm writing a book, I want there to be as much content as possible. I really want there to be the kind of thing, and what's his name from the Mercator Center, Tyler Cohen. He reviewed the new Right, and he said there's something of interest in every page. And that to me was like, oh my God, the just absolutely greatest compliment ever. So writing this book on the white pill, what I'm finding is things that are common knowledge to my mind, which is, you can't say common knowledge about yourself, but like things that I thought that everyone knew that they don't know. And I mean like my people in the broad sense. I'm like, okay, this is what I have to put in this book and tell them. And I had this tweet over the weekend, and and I just want to sometimes slap people who are black-pilled, because we've been black-pilled before. And the example I used is 1979. 1979, it was a given that Britain is over. It's done. Stick a fork in it. The British Empire is never coming back. True. Britain will never be the superpower it was in the past. True. You had, they didn't have electricity. You had garbage up to, in 1974, like taller than you. The unions had just totally taken over. And basically you had like
the 1870s.
No, 1970s.
Oh, in the 1970s? Wait,
yes, you don't know about this?
The unions have taken. Oh, yes. No, I'm sorry. Right.
Yeah.
In the pre-Thatcher era. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they called the winter of winter of discontent, and basically you had this moderate Tory at Heath, and then you had the I think it was Ed McMillan, maybe his name is, I forget his name, and they would just had like 3 elections in 2 years because both parties were the same.
Right.
And neither of them really were standing up to labor, and it was a given. Now you have a consensus. We can't do shit about it. We can't do shit about it. Therefore, no one can do anything about it. And it was a consensus in Britain that Britain's over. And the expression they used was managed decline, right? And Thatcher, it physically hurt her because she was really a boomer in the sense of like waving the flag, like rah, 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 yeah, hell yeah. And so hear her about her country being like, just go home, it's over. Like, not only was this saddened her, it enraged her. And she came in and she's like, no, we're not messing around. Like, we're bringing Britain back. And she did it. And she also took on the Soviet Union and won, without really having any bloodshed either. The Sex Pistols were I had this tweet. I said, in 1976, the Sex Pistols were telling us there is no future. That was the lyric. In 1989, the Soviet Union was falling and half the world was liberated peacefully. So to everyone who thinks that like it's all over, it was supposed to have been all over before. And I'm sorry, you are not going to tell me that Jack Dorsey is a more formidable foe than the Soviet Union, even the Soviet Union on its last legs. I don't see it. And even if I did see it, I'm sure not going down without a fight and being like, what are they going to do about it? There's nothing we can do. There's a lot we can do because they're not going down without a fight. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, look, I think that's absolutely right. And the truth is that if you look throughout history, I mean, there are so many moments where it would be more justified to be black-pilled than now, and the black pill was not the correct mind state to have. I mean, and there's also been times of real unrest and upheaval and all of these things. I mean, for God's sakes, we fought a fucking civil war where 600,000 people were killed just within our country killing our own countrymen. And we came out of that. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't think there's cause to take the black pill, but there are causes to take small individual black pills. Like there is a reason to suspect that perhaps voting on a federal level and electing the right politician to get in there is not going to be the path to saving the country. So in that sense, I think there's a good argument to be politically black pilled, if that makes sense.
Oh, I agree with you, but I'm looking at this election as some people are thinking, well, it doesn't matter who wins, we're all done. This is also very common with the alt-right, there's too many minorities, so on and so forth. And that argument, first of all, Hispanics vote for Republicans higher rates than Asians do. I think it's 3-1 vote for Democrat versus Republican, so it's still 75%. But again, if you have this binary thinking, people don't come here from Mexico and South America to be identity politics, I'm for trans rights and Muslims voters. That's not the kind of leftism that they are, number one. And number two is the counter argument that, if we just voted Republican, this country would be saved. We had a Republican president and a Republican Congress. They didn't do anything about spending. They didn't do anything about, rolling back the state or the worst. They didn't go after the colleges. They didn't go after the corporate press. They didn't do shit. So, Obama gave us the biggest Republican House majority since the 20s in 2014. What did they do with it?
No, there's a strong case to be made. I'm not sure this is true, but there's a strong case to be made from a libertarian perspective or from a populist right-wing perspective that Biden winning might be better than Trump getting reelected. I don't know that that's true, but there is a strong argument for that. And look, you could even look at Trump. I mean, the thing about the Trump administration that's crazy, right, is that he there really was, unlike previous presidential campaigns, there was one central theme to Donald Trump's president. I mean, okay, I guess there were a couple central themes, but the central like policy theme was about immigration.
Yeah,
I mean, it was build a wall, deport them all, you know, like this was, and he won. If ever anyone has had, you know, a mandate for one particular issue, this was it. Even Obama had like 4 or 5. Certainly, Bill Clinton was very vague. George W. Bush was very vague. You know, it was a lot of small government conservatism, restoring dignity to the White House. I mean, these were kind of, Trump was like, we're building a wall. Like, this is the policy. A wall between here and Mexico. That's the policy. Not only has he not gotten the wall, not only have they not all been deported, he could not even achieve. Now, maybe you don't blame him for this because he tried and the court struck him down, but he could not even achieve undoing Obama's executive fiat order on DACA. He couldn't even get that little bit of it done. Now, you can blame the system or the deep state or the courts or whatever. I mean, and with some fairness, you know, like there's a point to be made to that. But regardless, that is the reality, that this guy who promised you so much winning and I'm so smart that I'm going to be able to get in there couldn't even move the ball forward an inch on his central issue. So what exactly do you gain by having that guy in there? You can always say, well, it would be worse under the other guy, I suppose, but you tell me by what metric, what was worse under Obama? And I'm, you know, somebody who thinks Obama should be, you know, in prison. But how was it worse? I mean, all the Trump administration's done is he mocked the media for 4 years, which I think is very good. He's said rhetorically a few good things, and he's inflamed the left wing of this country to the point that they're burning cities. Would Biden be worse than that necessarily, even from a populist right-wing perspective? It seems at least debatable to me.
Hey guys, Michael Malice here, and I want to tell you about a company that is a lifesaver, Beachbody On Demand. They've been around for a very long time. If you text Malice, that's me, to 303030, you get a special free trial membership, access to the entire platform for free. Gyms are still closed in New York. It's driving me crazy. So I went online and I saw that there is a ton of effective workouts for every fitness level. They've got bodybuilding stuff, they've got weight training, yoga, dance workouts. This is the company behind P90X, behind Insanity. Find someone, here's my advice to you. Find someone, a coach who looks like you'd want to look like. Follow their instructions. You can look at your computer, your phone, whatever you need to do. They'll show you what the motions are like, and you could have a program that's different every day that keeps up your interest. If you text Malice to 303030, you get a special free trial membership. A great way for focus on mental health via physical health while we're all on lockdown in this hellscape. Let's get back to the show. Yeah, I had this tweet. It's just really funny sometimes when you tweet something out and you're putting it at face value and people just are not capable of reading things at face value. I said, I'm not being sarcastic. Were there any agencies that Trump and the Republicans eliminated when he had control? And I said, I'm assuming there were a few minor ones, right? Just for cosmetic reasons. They're going to combine 3 into 1 and say, oh, look, we cut 2 agencies. You would expect that to happen. And the degree to which conservatives have been trained to make excuses for the Republican Party is pathological. Because right away people are saying, oh, well, blah, 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 they're Democrats. I go, I am saying I expect them to have done some. Like, can you name what they are? Because I would guess that there are some. And everyone's like, oh, well, you know, what do you expect with Nancy Pelosi? Like, so you're even hypothetically, you're saying there's no expectation for you to cut a single department, even for cosmetic reasons. Because I know he had a rule. I don't know if this actually came to fruition. I thought it was via an executive order that any new regulation that passes, you have to repeal to.
Yes.
So in that context, I thought he had some kind of thing where he's like, okay, every government, Department of State, Department of Energy, you have to give me 3 programs that we're going to sunset. I didn't think that would be at all implausible. And right away, all the conservatives like, oh, what do you expect? And it's just like, I would expect there to be some cosmetic changes, even that. And They couldn't provide any. It doesn't mean that they don't exist, but it just shows to what extent either Trump isn't putting forward that he did it, or to the extent of the impotence. Now, is that saying Biden would be better? No, I'm not saying that Biden would be better. I'm just saying let's keep track of just how bad it is if you expect the wins to be coming from Washington.
Right. And of course that he did sign that executive order that said for every new regulation you have to repeal two. But of course that's completely cosmetic and misleading, because you could add one new regulation that is a sweeping, vast regulation that affects society much more, and then repeal two that were never enforced to begin with, that were very minor regulations. And when you have a federal registry with tens of thousands of regulations, it's really, it's kind of meaningless to make that rule. But yeah, that certainly says something, that even for cosmetic reasons of vanity, I can't think of anything that's been abolished. I don't even know what's really been reduced. I mean, certainly in the energy sector, there was some meaningful deregulation under Trump. Okay. And I've read people who, you know, are experts in that who have like said, no, this is actually fairly significant.
Oh, good.
So that's something you could point to that you probably wouldn't get under an Obama or under a Biden.
And Betsy DeVos with having due process at colleges is a big one.
Yeah, no, that is a big one. That's true. So there are these like small little victories here, or even big, you know, victories here. But on the central major issues that you would expect, there's been next to nothing. And to me, the one that you really can't, that I'm sorry, there is no excuse for Donald Trump on, even with all the deep state stuff. There's just no excuse, is the foreign policy, because he is the commander in chief, and he could end wars. He can do that. And you can sit there and say like, oh, well, he was trying to end this war, and then the deep state started putting out this propaganda, and the media all turned on him. It's like, yeah, that's true. Do it anyway. I don't care. Do it anyway. Pull the troops out of Syria. Are they going to write a million bad stories about you? Yeah, they're going to do that anyway.
Yeah, okay. like they're not otherwise.
Right. Pull it out. And I'm sorry, when you're sitting there and he fucking appoints John Bolton as the national security advisor. And then when it goes bad, now, you know, he's writing a book, and last week, you know, his people are out on TV and they're like, he just wanted to bomb everything. You're like, well, how could we have known that? How could we have possibly known that John Bolton was not the person to put as your national security advisor if your goal was to end the longest wars in American history?
Yeah. It was funny because I've been following Bolton on these different shows and the things he was saying. And I never thought John Bolton was particularly dishonest. I thought he was pretty open about his point of view. And I think his perspective is something that has a tradition in America. I think it's not empty. You can back it up. I think it is evil. I think it is counterproductive. That's the most important one. I would even say, just talking conservatives, it's not, I'm even going to grant you your premise that, okay, it's okay if we kill people overseas, otherwise we're going to kill them here. Let's pretend that that's the case. But they do end up killing us here, and it does end up escalating. This is not something where like we kill them and then we're done and we walk away and it doesn't have consequences for us.
Well, it's really, it's the worst kind of circular logic, because they say, you know, they start this war on terror and they say, well, we have to fight them over there, so we don't fight them over here. And then every time they come over here, that's that much more evidence that we have to fight them over there, right. So we don't fight them over here. And it's really like that. And that's what happens. That's why everyone goes like, oh, well, there was another, you know, terrorist attack. We have to do something.
Right. Right. Some people did something. And so bold for him to go on these, like there was one story he told, which was really amazing. He said I think it was, he heard the secondhand through the translator, I believe, that President Trump was talking to Xi Jinping, head of China, President of China, and he was telling Xi Jinping that the Midwest farmers are key to his reelection, right? And that he said, look, it would help us out a lot if you bought this kind of crops from us, blah, blah, blah. And Bolton painted this, not ridiculously, as he's lobbying the Chinese government to help these farmers and help his reelection. Now, you could take a step back and say, like, anytime the president is cheerleading for American sales, he is doing his job, even if it's going to end up helping him. It should help him. Like if someone is helping America, blah, blah. And what's amazing is there was a next clip I had was he was at a rally and Trump said, this book is bullshit. He's like, no one's been tougher on China. He's like, I made them buy like American products like no other president has. I'm like, you're saying what he said, but you're just saying it. But the point is, I think it was the one from 60 Minutes. I forget her name, the older blonde woman. And she was asking him, Martha or something. She was asking both. She goes, how, if you knew all this, why didn't you come forward during impeachment? Like, this is really germane. And Bolton goes, well, I knew their minds were made up. And I'm like, you telling me wasn't made up about witnesses and evidence, and there were people on the fence, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Romney, and maybe a couple of others. If you had come forward with this, that this wouldn't have had any consequences, is that even legal if you have information that 5% could change the possibility of impeachment and you're sitting on it, that you don't do something if you care that much about this country? So I don't even understand what to make of it.
And then to write a book,
right,
and go, oh, but I will profit off this information. I will,
right.
like, that seems pretty. So when he was being interviewed with
wait,
Brett
let me
Baier,
ask you though, do you think he was lying? Or do you think he's making up stories? Like, what do you think's going on here? I can't make heads or tails of it myself.
Well, so I think that Bolton is quite okay with lying, and he's actually said before that so this is kind of the weird duopoly of John Bolton, not duopoly, duality of John Bolton, which is kind of interesting, right? So he said, and I believe this was on Judge Napolitano's show back in the day, that he said that he is absolutely comfortable lying to the American people if it was for national security reasons and for this, like, right? So there's something interesting about that statement, right? Number one, you're kind of like, he's admitting that he's lying. And then number two, you're like, wow, that's kind of refreshingly honest. So isn't there's something kind of interesting about it being honest, that you would lie about, a matter of foreign policy. So I don't know. Now that belief system also allows
he's right to do it, because if we're like about to strike someone and you can't have them know, like, we're not going to hit them. Like,
you could come up with a scenario for sure, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is when you add human psychology into that philosophical belief, that is a very easy tool to then rationalize to yourself why you're actually lying, because you're on this ends justify them, or the means justify the ends, and you're on the right side of history, and so you can lie for these. So I don't know, but I will say that there is still something about Bolton that I find refreshingly honest. Even that quote there, as much as I don't like the guy and think what he stands for is pure evil. He was being interviewed by Brett Baier, and he corrected the record where he said, a lot of people were speculating that the line for him when he really was over being a part of the Trump administration was when he didn't strike Iran after they shot down an unarmed drone. And he was furious that Donald Trump, for which something I've never heard a president say or do before, is Donald Trump said he asked the generals how many people would die, and they estimated something like 150 people were going to die. And he said, I don't know if I want to kill 150 people. No one was hurt on our side for this. And it's really something, the clown world we live in, that of all the presidents, like, Trump's the only one who goes, wait, but I'm going to be killing people if I do this. So he didn't do that. And John Bolton was fierce, and he admitted, he goes, this was a huge problem for me. So basically Donald Trump hasn't, unlike Obama and Bush, hasn't gotten us into a new war. And this really pissed John Bolton off. Like, how have you not started a war with Iran, which, is really bonkers. But that's his worldview. That's his perspective. But John Bolton corrected the record to Brett Baier and said, well, that was a huge problem for me. The final straw was when he wanted to meet with the Taliban to work out a deal to end the war in Afghanistan. So it's not just that he wouldn't start a new war, but now this motherfucker is actually thinking about ending a war. And he goes, well, I just can't be a part of this anymore. I wash my hands of this administration. So that is, you almost have to commend his honesty, but that is a little window into how people at this level, national security advisor, think about U.S. foreign policy. That war is just, you add them, you don't take them away.
I think I answered my own question, because if Bolton is accusing Trump of saying, look, these farmers are helpful to my reelection, which is indisputably true, and that China we very easily know that he would want China to buy American goods. He's been saying this publicly for a long time. I think this is not a really controversial statement that would benefit Americans for China to return the favor, because we buy a lot of their goods. And then when he calls into Fox and Friends, I believe it was, or Hannity, and he says, yeah, I made them buy a lot of goods, Bolton's story is thereby confirmed. Now, whether this is impeachment worthy, I don't think it is, or even necessarily maybe a crime, but it does speak to, like, that part, he didn't really make it up if Trump is just going on TV and bragging about it.
It's all so strange. Like, and this came up a lot during the impeachment, where, you know, the big accusation against Trump was quid pro quo, which essentially means nothing. I mean, it's like something for something. That's what quid pro quo means. And every foreign policy deal is a quid pro quo.
Yes.
Like, they all are. Every
Hopefully.
foreign aid. Yeah, of course. I mean, like, it's not just like every, you know, dime of foreign aid that we give out has strings attached to it. Now, so then they'll go like, well, no, but it's a quid pro quo for him, not for the country. So he's doing it to get reelected. He's not just doing something good for the country. But of course, if he does something good for the country, he can then brag about that and use that to get reelected. And that's fine. Government in general is a big contradiction. Like, it's, you know, the state is here to protect your private property. By the way, we have to steal your private property in order to fund the state. Every inch of it is a contradiction. But so if you were caught giving people money to vote for you, that would be a crime, a scandal, an impeachable offense. You're bribing people to vote for you. But Andrew Yang could run on the promise of, I'm going to give you money if you vote for me. And that somehow is okay. So all of these things, it's like, it really seems like you just have to decide, we're going to make this one a scandal. And if the press lines up behind you, then we could decide to make this a scandal. But Trump, yes, explicitly ran on, you know, reducing trade deficits, which personally I don't care about at all. But what is reducing a trade deficit? Well, it's either we're going to buy less of their shit or they're going to buy more of our shit. It's the only way it can be done. So like, for that to be a scandal, that it's bonkers.
This reminds me of talking about foreign policy and how, you know, how doublethink it often is and how people are doing one thing or saying another. I'm just going to leave with this. It reminded me of something I read in one of the Thatcher biographies. And it was just this great line because, you know, she was very known. And for people who don't know her, she's such a badass. I could go on about her for a long, long time. But at one point, Reagan, there's a book called Reagan and Thatcher, The Difficult Relationship, which is a masterpiece. Reagan basically sat down with Gorbachev, and because he had such a reputation earned as this hardcore anti-communist Cold Warrior, he got his stripes as head of the Screen Actors Guild, trying to ferret out communists from Hollywood back in the day. Like, he sat down and he started talking about, the US had a big nuclear advantage. This was an issue for the Soviet Union. And he sat down with Gorbachev and he's like, let's see if we can figure out a way to eliminate all nuclear weapons. And Thatcher completely lost her mind because she's like, this guy's a complete moron. You can't uninvent something, you idiot. And then they're like, how are you going to have some kind of transparency, right? And there's like, oh, we'll have inspections. And Thatcher, I forget who she was talking to, one of her aides. And she goes, how do we know Gorbachev wouldn't cheat? I would cheat. And it was just such a great moment and I don't know that that's a bad thing about her, that when push comes to shove, when you're dealing with foreign policy, with people who are your friends, and Reagan did her dirty. This is a whole other long story. We can get to that another time. You lie to your closest allies because your interest always has to be Great Britain. And it would be great if things are better for the Russian people. And God bless America, US and A. But I'm here as the PM. I'm looking out for the Queen and her empire, and I'm going to do what I have to do, including smiling and lying to this Ruski's face in order to make sure that my country is provided for, and I'll be proud of it.
That guy in the head, and you're like, well, what do you want to do? Not have a referee? Like, if he's shooting people in the head, probably not. Like, yeah.
I also love the idea that you can have like a football game without a referee. Like, it's inconceivable that like the coaches would sit down and like watch the video themselves and try to work something out.
It's like if you went down,
impossible to even imagine.
You could literally walk over to any basketball court, right now. Maybe not right now, but in normal times, you can walk to any basketball court and people are playing without a ref. Like, you can call your own fouls. And then if there's a referee who's shooting people in the head, and they were like, well, what are we going to do? Call our own fouls? And you're like, I think that is preferable. It's hard for me to take a nice jump shot when I'm worried about a gun, coming in.
The problem is that none of these people, unlike myself, have read Anatomy of the State. So they don't know what the state is. Dave, people are going to
be so mad at me. All right, our next crossover episode.
What has been your favorite part of this episode?
My favorite part by far is that you have read Anatomy of the State. I can't wait to talk about it with you.
You are welcome.